Hello and welcome to the Cullen Neighbourhood Partnership allotments. My name is Tom Osborne, and in conjunction with the Belfast City Council, I'm doing some cookery videos and demonstrations for a series that we're going to call Family Favourites. During the course of the next few episodes, approximately about 10, I'm going to show you a variety of different dishes that family members genuinely enjoy to have within their homes. With these recipes, I'm going to try my best to give them a healthy approach and make them in such a way that everybody can do and really enjoy them. My main aim is to make these as tasty as possible and make them as simple as possible for people like yourselves to cook at home. Okay, the first in our series that we're going to do today is going to be a cottage pie. A very simple and very basic cottage pie that people can make at home. We have a series of different ingredients that we use. We're going to keep these to a minimum. Now, in general, cottage pies and shepherd's pies are two slightly different things. They generally are the same recipe, but the difference being a cottage pie is generally used with beef mince, and a shepherd's pie will be with lamb mince. First of all, I want to have a look at the ingredients. Now, the ingredients for this are, as I say, very, very simple. We have the beef mince here. We have chopped onion. A personal favourite and a brand that we have are oxo cubes. Now, I personally prefer oxo cubes, and when I start to use these for the recipe, I will discuss them further. We will need vegetable oil. We will also need potatoes. Okay, now I've already pre-prepared these potatoes in advance, and I will discuss these slightly in a second, and we'll discuss that further. Optional are items such as mushrooms, items such as tomato puree, and if you were that way partial, you could also add a splash of red wine. But in effect, the very basics that we need for this dish are beef mince, onions, definitely stock cubes, they're very important, and potatoes. When we're making the potatoes, for the potato stage, we will use salt, and in this case we will also use milk. I will discuss that further as well. We will also use butter, or a good quality spread such as Golden Cow here. That is the basic ingredients that we have for cottage pie. I will go on shortly now to the method and take you through the method and show you what we have. Okay, so we're now going to begin the cooking processes of the cottage pie. For the cottage pie, if you look down here, I already have the potatoes on the heat. Effectively, all I have in this pot are potatoes and cold water. I always start cooking off potatoes from cold water. I feel it's a better method, and it's a method that does not tend to sort of create any blemishes on the outside of the potato, and it gives a good even cooking. Now, some people will season their water. Personally, I don't, and the reason why I don't is because I prefer to do all my seasoning at the end. Now, there is a bit of a myth where if you put the salt into the water now, the salt is going to go the whole way through the flavour, the whole way through the potato during the cooking process. Yes, this does happen, but we're going to mash this potato, and what happens when we mash the potato is we mix it and we break it down, and we season it as we're breaking it down. So therefore, I'm happier to get the flavour all perfect at the end before I put it over the top of the cottage pie itself. Now, over to the main part of the cottage pie, which is the mince part of the recipe. As you can see here, I have a pot on the cooker top. The pot is being preheated. We will always work in a hot pan. The reason we do this is because we want to try where possible to brown the meat. We don't want to boil it. And what I mean by that, and you will see this boiling with the mince because of the water content. If we're cooking steak, if we're cooking any other sort of meat, we always want to cook in a hot pan. The reason why we want to brown the meat is because we want to caramelise the natural sugars and get a nice brown colour. if we were to put our meat into a cold pan, what would happen was microscopically around the surface of the meat, water would drip out. And as the water drips out, it forms a puddle, a microscopic small puddle around the beef or around the meat. That water then begins to boil, and that boiling effect actually makes the meat turn grey, and that's not what we want. Now, in saying that, that is what happens with steak and what happens with large pieces of meat. Unfortunately, because there may be a high water content within this mince, we will actually see both sides of that. When we put the mince into the bottom of the pan, some of the water content will come out and it will start to boil, and then the idea will be is to evaporate that water off. Once that water is evaporated off, then the oil can then begin to fry the meat. As the meat begins to fry, it will then begin to brown, and that's exactly what we want. Now we're going to start the cooking of the mince process. Now, there may be some water content comes out of the mince, as I said. Hopefully if you're making steak or anything like that, you wouldn't have as much of a water content coming out. So, first of all, some oil into the pan. Now, as you can see immediately that is starting to smoke. That is because my pan is so hot, and that's exactly what I want. But be aware, this is a fire caution, so be careful if you're doing it at home. That is the sort of noise that you want to hear. You want to hear that nice sizzle. Then we start to move the mince around. And then, as the cold mince hits the warm pan, it will begin to cool that oil down. Okay, so as shown there, I showed you how to cook the mince in a hot pan. I showed you how to give it a quick mix, quick stir around. And if you look from the close-up shot, you'll actually see there was quite a high water content started to come out of the mince. That is perfectly normal and it's perfectly natural. But what you want to do is you want to keep cooking that mince and keep cooking that mince, and literally evaporate that water content away. It is quite common and it does happen with mince. Looking down at the potatoes now, the potatoes are boiling away quite nicely, so we want to have them on a rolling boil. We don't want them bubbling like crazy, bubbling like mad, but we want that water to be moving all the time so that we're getting a good cooking on the potatoes. With relation to the mince, coming back to the mince, a vast majority of this water has now evaporated away, and if you listen to the sound, you will hear a much more rapid crackling noise, and that is the meat now beginning to fry now that all that water content has come off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this mince from the pan. I'm just going to place it in this bowl, and again I'm going to put my pan back onto the heat. And the reason why I'm doing this is I now want to begin to fry my onions. And if necessary and you want, we will fry the onions as well. Again, we put our pan back onto the heat. We always cook under a high heat. So now that my pan here has begun to heat up again, tiny amount of oil, tiny amount of oil. And again, making sure that our pan is hot. We come in with our onions, and we always want to hear a crackling sound. If we don't hear a crackling sound, then the pan's simply not hot enough. So again, we're beginning to brown our onions off. And the same with our mushrooms. We'll add our mushrooms in. Again, as I say, these are optional. And we always want lots of noise from the pots. We always want lots of heat in the pans. We don't want to allow our cooking or our pots to cool down. And as we start to get nice colour on them, effectively what is happening as we're sweating food down, We're cooking it down and cooking it down, and we're allowing all the natural flavours to come out and be removed from the food. The more we remove the natural flavours, the stronger the flavour that these foods are going to get, and we're then combining it all together. I'm happy that we've cooked that down far enough now, and now I'm going to add back in our mince. Okay, so we have a very good element of cooking on the beef, on this beef mixture. So, as I stated earlier on, I like to add a little bit of tomato. I think beef and tomato goes very, very well together. So, probably in there I've added probably about 2 good tablespoons of tomato puree. And again, that's been mixed through. Now for the probably one of the most important ingredients when we're cooking is our stock. Now, as I say, I'm not making stock today as such. I'm just using these as a flavouring. And they are a strong beef flavour. So looking at sort of the recipe quantities, a lot of the problems that people have is they don't put enough of ingredients in. And they're afraid to put up. So I'm crumbling in. That is 1 full beef stock cube in there, beef oxo cube. I think for that method there, and for the amount of mince that I have there, I'm going to add 4. Actually, looking at this now, I'm going to add 3. Always remember, we can put it in, but we can't take it out. So again, mix this through, and immediately what you're going to notice is the colour of this whole mixture begins to change, and it's already a much darker colour, and that is effectively the beef stock. So, as with any food, we need to check and we need to taste. If we don't taste, how do we know what the food tastes like? How do we adjust it? How do we improve it? So, recipes are a guide. Recipes are not an exact instruction, they're only a guide. And we need to adjust these things. So, I'm going to taste this now, and I want to make sure that there's enough flavour from it. Is it salty enough? Now, on tasting that, I recognise that is slightly bland, very, very slightly bland. So, I'm happy enough to add another stock cube. If you feel that your food is bland, don't be afraid to add more to it to bring it out. Your recipe might say 3, it might say 4. That might not necessarily be quite enough. But remember, add little bits at a time, and then that way, if you add little bits at a time, you can adjust it as you go along. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add hot water. And when you're cooking, always add hot water. Don't be tempted to add cold water. And I've added in there approximately a cupful. You will be able to see that I have literally created a slight sauciness around that. And that has loosened that whole mixture up. And I'm adding hot water. I'm not adding cold water because cold water is going to cool our whole mixture down. If you find that you add too much water or too much hot water and you want to change that and you want to adjust it, let's use science. Use evaporation. Don't be afraid to let that water bubble away and evaporate off. That will reduce down around it and will give a thicker, more concentrated sauciness around the mixture. So, I'm now happy, I've removed that from the heat, and I'm just going to let this sit to the side, and then we'll come back to this in a second or two. Okay, so, our potatoes have been boiling probably about a good 20 minutes. Now, as you can see, they're starting to break apart. And when we touch them with a fork, the fork will easily go through them and break them. That's exactly the way we want them. If you look now, the waters went slightly cloudy as well, and that's actually the starch coming out of the potatoes. So, this next bit is actually really, really important, and it's the difference between good mashed potato and perfectly bad mashed potato. So we want to be very, very gently with these potatoes, and we want the least amount of water content going inside them. There's some blends and some brands of potato will actually start to absorb the water and they will go very, very mushy. And potatoes like that are actually very bad for mash. So what I effectively want to do, I want to drain as much of this water off as I can, but really rather gently. And rather than dumping them really, really hard inside my colander, I want them actually to go inside the colander really quite gently, because I want that water away. I don't want the potatoes absorbing that water. Now, effectively, what's happening now is the steam is actually drying the outside of those potatoes, and it doesn't do any harm to maybe let those sit for about 30 seconds to a minute. And what happens is the steam evaporates off and it begins to dry the potato. Now, the downside of that is if we go too far, it can sometimes create a skin on the outside of the potato, which can create lumps in our mash, which we don't want either. So normally about 30 seconds, we want all that liquid away as much as we possibly can. I'm happy with that now. All that water's away. We shouldn't even really need to shake hard. We want to go nice and gentle with them and then tip them back into our pot. Now, I'm sure most people before have mashed potatoes, so we can be quite rough now and beat in. Now, if you look at the movement that I'm using, I'm actually almost like I'm rowing a boat, and I'm mashing them and I'm squashing them up. Now, if there had been water left in there, the problem we would have had is it would have started to mix with the mashed potato and effectively thin it out and make it go a bit sloppy, and that's not what we want. And if your potatoes are cooked enough, we should get a nice fluffy mash. Now, I have quite easily no lumps in that because I've used this masher with very little elbow grease. So for this here, it's entirely up to you how much salt you use. For me to get a nice flavour, I estimate by experience 1 chef's pinch, 2 chef's pinches, and 1 for luck. Now, earlier on I described that I don't actually season the water, and I didn't bother, I just added salt. Now, you can add pepper also. I personally don't add pepper, but you can. And if your mashed potato was a little bit dry, now you have to estimate this and look at it yourself and make a judgment call. If it was a little bit dry, you can add a little bit of milk as such, but this is not actually that dry, so I'm only going to add a very, very small amount. There's only maybe a tablespoon of milk in there. Now, the best ingredient that we want is our very lovely Golden Cow. The Golden Cow is a good brand. The reason why it's a good brand is you have brands like Flora. This is the closest spread you can get close to natural butter. If you have brands such as Flora, then the problem that you have is they're not actually a butter-based brand. They're actually a vegetable oil and a based spread, which makes them quite different. Now, if you look, I put everything in there because I want to make my life easier. So I have the milk, I have the butter, and I have the salt. I then take a wooden spoon and I begin to work that in. And again, I'm not afraid to beat this and really, really work it to make a nice creamy mash. And the natural heat of the butter, sorry, the natural heat of the mash will melt that spread down on the butter. And that gives us a good creamy mash. Now, we want to taste this. And this is the most important part, as I said earlier on. We want to taste. If it is bland, we add more salt. Salt brings out the natural flavour. That's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. I'm happy with that. Should that be a wee bit bland, I would add more salt. But again, we're thinking about being healthy. Again, if you're trying to watch heart conditions or you're trying to watch anything to do with health, then you may want to think twice before you add the salt. Because we're using this mashed potato for a cottage pie, this is actually going to go into the oven. So quite often what I like to do with that, I like to add an egg yolk to the mashed potato. This does two things. Number one, it starts to enrich the flavour of the mashed potato, and it will also help the mashed potato go a golden brown colour when it's actually cooking it, or actually sort of finishing off and browning effectively in the oven. So I like to often do that. Again, I'm sure everybody has seen how to split an egg yolk, but if we just separate the two, the white from the egg, so the white from the yolk, sorry, and you do that just by going between the two shells. You can also do it in your hand as well, but it's not just as hygienic. And then I literally drop the raw egg yolk into the mashed potato and I mix it through. You want to move this all the time. You do not want to stop this process because we do not want to scramble the egg yolk with the heat. So we want to really, really vigorously work that in so that it's not scrambling, and keep that moving. And already you'll see how much that has actually enriched and effectively made this mash more creamier. So we have a really lovely mash, we have a really lovely mince mixture. Now it's time to simply build your cottage pie. So in a nutshell, we have a nice oven tray like so, and we take our mix, our beef mix, and we lay that out. And again, just pressing it all down in the bottom of the tin. Then we take our mash mix, now we want to try and keep this as tidy as we possibly can. So at this point I don't want to start mixing and moving too much at this point. And the reason for that being is we're going to end up mixing the mince through the mash, and we don't want that, not at this point. So if you look, I'm dolloping all this on the top, like so, because if I start to move that and mix that, I'm going to mix that together, and I don't want that. So in this case what I've done, taking a flat knife, you can use a palette knife or a big sort of pastry knife like this, or any other knife that works for you, and effectively I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to start pushing down. I'm pushing this across like so, a bit like icing a cake. Another way this could be done as well could be with a piping bag, if you are happy enough to use such things. Not everybody would be that confident. And again, what I'm starting to do, because I have this covered over, I'm starting to skim the top layer across so that I'm not mixing the mince through. I'm literally skimming it across. Again, I don't want to mix the whole mince through. And again, as I said and stated earlier on, cooking is entirely up to yourself. You can have this mixture wetter, you can have more gravy and more sauce through it, or you could have it drier. And likewise with the mash, you can put as much butter in, as much milk in as you see fit, and as much as you want. Entirely up to yourself. There's no right or wrong answer, it's personal preference. Just going to wipe around the outside, tidy it up a little bit. As I say, you could pipe this on and have nice swirls of piping. We would do that in restaurants, if we're working in restaurants, but for home, I'm sure that type of thing there will suffice. If you want to maybe run a knife through it, or sorry, a fork through it, and those little ridges will crisp up in the oven as well. So I'm now going to put this in the oven. This oven is a fan assisted oven, and effectively a fan assisted oven has a fan in the back and it's blowing the heat all around the oven all the time. So effectively the heat should be the same in the bottom as it is in the top. Old non-fan assisted ovens, they quite often heat rises, so they would have been warmer on the top, but these types of oven it doesn't matter. So if you can hear a blower inside your oven, it's most likely a fan assisted oven. Most of modern ovens are. So we can put it in the top, we can put it in the middle, we can put it in the bottom, it doesn't matter. Now, For cooking most things, I generally cook between 180 degrees and 200 degrees. If you want a really hot oven, go to 210. This is pre-cooked, so we're not worried about killing bacteria. We're only really worrying about browning it. So I'm happy, sort of reasonably hot oven, nice and quickly, 10 minutes to brown the top of that at 200 degrees for about 10 minutes. If you have it in the fridge, or you have it in the fridge for the day before, you're going to need to heat it and heat it thoroughly. So you want to go a little bit lower and a little bit longer. So we'll say 170, 180 degrees centigrade for maybe half an hour to get, if it came out of the fridge the day before. And that can be done. You can make that as it is now the day before and then reheat it the following day. Okay, so this is our shepherd's pie. It's just out of the oven. As you say, that nice golden brown colour, that has came from the egg yolk. That's exactly what has given us that brown colour. So, come down then, just portioning. Nice and gentle across. And again, how much does everybody eat? It's entirely up to them.